Good evening and welcome to The World Today. I'm Amritpal Singh. This is a show in which we tell you what happens around the world, and our big story today is how the world is battling the pandemic of COVID. Well, there has been a lockdown that has been imposed in the national capital, Delhi. In Rajasthan, a 15-day lockdown like restriction has been imposed. The world over, some places masks are being taken off, schools are opening, things are opening up, whereas in Australia and New Zealand they've established an air bubble. The United States continues to battle the COVID crisis. There could be again resumption of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is what Dr. Fauci, the pandemic advisor to President Biden, says. We'll tell you all that and much more over the next 1 hour. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at this hour. World battles COVID-19. More than 14 crore 21 lakh people worldwide have so far tested positive for COVID-19. Over 12 crore people have recovered. Deadly virus so far has claimed over 30 lakh 35,000 lives globally. Prime Minister Narendra Modi chairs an important meeting amid the surge in COVID cases, reviews the COVID situation in the country, interacts with leading doctors from across the country via video conferencing. U.S. rocked by back-to-back shootings across the country on Sunday. 5 injured in Louisiana shooting, 3 dead in an apartment complex in Austin and Texas. 3 others killed and 2 wounded in a shooting in a bar in Wisconsin. Daughter of hunger-striking Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny calls on Russian authorities to allow a doctor to treat her father in prison. Medical professionals say he's at risk of kidney failure. Czech Republic and Russia expel each other's diplomats over the 2014 explosion at a Czech ammunition depot. Protesters gather outside Russian embassy in Prague, chanting anti-Russia slogans and calling on the EU to support the Czech Republic. So those are the headlines we are tracking at this hour. Let's begin with the big news of the hour. Well, the big news, of course, is COVID, which the world is battling. To take an update of the situation worldwide, more than 14 crore 21 lakh people have so far tested positive worldwide, while over 12 crore people have recovered from the virus. The deadly virus has claimed over 30 lakh 35,000 lives so far. The United States continues to be the worst affected country by the pandemic. So far, more than 3 crore 24 lakh people have tested positive for COVID there, while over 5 lakh 81,000 people have died of the virus in the United States. And even as the surge in COVID infections continue in India and many other parts of the world, let's take a look at how the world is faring in its fight against the pandemic.
Countries across the globe are battling COVID-19 pandemic. Cases are rising every day, hopes still alive. The motive is to defeat COVID-19. Restrictions as well as speeding up of vaccination programs in many parts of the world is a renewed effort in battling the pandemic. In India, the national capital announced a 6-day lockdown from 10 p.m. on Monday to 5 a.m. next Monday. Only essential services will be allowed in Delhi during this period. The Rajasthan government has imposed 15-day lockdown-like curbs in the state from Monday till May 3rd, owing to the surge in COVID-19 cases. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is holding meetings from time to time to take stock of the situation. The total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in the United States surpassed 31.66 million on Sunday, with the death toll exceeding 5,67,000. The United States remained the worst-hit country in the world with the most caseload and related death toll. The top US pandemic advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, on Sunday said he expected the use of Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine to be resumed in the US after it was temporarily suspended. The Brazilian health ministry official asked women to delay getting pregnant until the worst of the pandemic passes, saying the virus variant that is devastating the South American country appears to affect expectant mothers more than the earlier versions of the virus. The recommendation comes as Brazil continues to be one of the global epicenters of the pandemic, with more Brazilians dying of the virus each day than anywhere else in the world. A South African community struggling under the economic impact of COVID-19 has turned to recycling as a way to put food on the table and clean up their neighborhood. In the poor Johannesburg neighborhood of Lawrenceville, recycling isn't just a way to protect the environment, it also puts food on the table. The community has struggled to survive under the global health crisis. South Africa introduced a lockdown in March 2020. By April, 3 million people had lost their jobs and 1 in 5 were going hungry, according to a survey by several South African universities. Germany on Sunday held an official Memorial Day to commemorate the nearly 80,000 people who lost their lives to the coronavirus pandemic. Earlier in the day, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, as well as relatives of coronavirus victims, attended a morning mass in the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, a Berlin landmark dedicated to peace and reconciliation. The official ceremony at a concert hall in central Berlin was limited to only very few people due to corona restriction, but it was televised on public channels. In Italy, from stagehands to waiters and waitresses, hundreds of those working in Rome's entertainment and hospitality industry on Sunday pleaded the government for a lifeline as the country prepares to reopen. Beating empty black storage trunks used in concerts and theatres, workers gathered in Rome's Piazza del Popolo to dramatize their demand for a government fund to help them survive. Moving to Southeast Asia. In Thailand, bars and restaurants have been shut down ahead of restrictions imposed on Sunday to curb with the surge in COVID-19 cases. 2 weeks of restrictions on restaurants are in place. At the same time, 59 provinces are classified as orange. The COVID-19 pandemic in Bangladesh continued to break its own record with 102 deaths reported from the country on Saturday. The government has ramped up measures to fight the pandemic and provide relief to the poor people in the country. Health Minister Zahid Malik inaugurated the largest COVID-19 hospital in Dhaka on Saturday. The COVID-19 dedicated hospital of the Dhaka North City Corporation has a capacity of 1,000 beds with 212 ICU beds, 250-bed HDU and a COVID emergency unit with 50 beds. Israel revoked outdoor coronavirus mask requirement as a sign of the country's return to relative normality, boosted by a mass vaccination campaign against the COVID-19 pandemic. With about 81% of citizens or residents over 16, that is the age group eligible for Pfizer or BioNTech vaccine in Israel, having received both doses, contagions and hospitalizations are down sharply. But entry by foreigners is still limited, and non-immune Israelis who return from abroad must self-isolate due to the concern that virus variants could challenge the vaccine. In the midst of all these, airports across New Zealand were buzzing with excitement on Monday after authorities reopened borders between Australia and New Zealand, a pandemic milestone that allows quarantine-free travel between the countries for the first time in over a year. Though most Australian states have allowed quarantine-free visits from New Zealand residents since late last year, New Zealand had enforced isolation for arrivals from its neighbour, citing concerns about sporadic virus outbreaks there. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison and New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said in a joint statement that the open border will help drive the economic recovery for both countries and reunite thousands with families and friends. Both Australia and New Zealand had largely closed their borders to non-citizens and permanent residents more than a year ago, helping to keep their COVID-19 numbers relatively low compared with several other developed countries. World Today Desk, DD India.
And amid the continuing spate of record daily deaths due to COVID-19, the government of Bangladesh has decided to extend the ongoing lockdown for one more week. State Minister for Public Administration Farhad Hussain said in Dhaka on Monday that the lockdown will remain in force from April 22nd to 28th with the same restrictions imposed as in the previous week. He announced that it will be a stricter one. The notification will be issued after the decision is approved by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Bangladesh announced its first phase of lockdown on the 5th of April, which lasted till the 13th of April. In the second week of the hard lockdown, starting from the 14th of April, all public offices, shops, malls, public transport, except those engaged in emergency and essential services, were suspended. The current lockdown is set to come to an end on the 21st of April. The Civil Aviation Authority of Bangladesh issued a notification on Monday extending the suspension of the international flights till April 28th. Earlier, the international flights were suspended till April 21st. Well, Bangladesh is hit by the pandemic quite badly. Of course, once this lockdown was imposed, as I said, on the April 14th, and now the decision has been taken to extend it. And let's try and understand graphically that how the world is battling and what efforts the world is taking to fight the pandemic. This is how the world battles the COVID crisis. US is likely to resume the use of Johnson & Johnson vaccine after it was temporarily suspended. This is what the pandemic advisor to US President Joe Biden, Dr. Fauci, said, saying that this vaccine could be back on the market. Well, Brazil has told its women to delay getting pregnant after the Brazil virus variant appears to affect expectant mothers more than the others. In Libya, Libya began its vaccination pretty late. In fact, it was only last week that they got their vaccines. They have started vaccinating their elderly. Italy, on the other hand, is planning to relax the COVID restrictions from April 26th. As you remember, Italy had seen the worst of deaths. Things are improving there. It's decided to open bars and restaurants. There they've decided to open cinemas, etc. But Thailand, bars and restaurants have been closed ahead of the restrictions, which are likely to be imposed to curb the infection surge. While Australia and New Zealand have opened their travel bubble and to ease the situation there. Bangladesh, as I already told you, has announced an extension of their hard restrictions. But meanwhile, Delhi has announced a six-day lockdown beginning from this evening, 10 p.m. and which will go on till Monday. Rajasthan has imposed a 15-day lockdown like curbs in the state. It's as good as a lockdown in Rajasthan, which is also battling the crisis. The numbers there are not very good, but the aggressive vaccination drive is on in the country. Close to about 12.38 crore vaccine doses have been administered so far around the country. In fact, the vaccination which is allowed above 45 years of age to people above above 45 years of age is aggressively being people are being vaccinated. 12.3 lakh doses have been administered in the last 24 hours alone. The Prime Minister held a review meeting to take stock of the COVID situation. He took a meeting yesterday, he took a meeting today with doctors from across the country. He's given directions to scale up the availability of ICU beds, medical oxygen availability in hospitals, and the supply of the remdesivir drug or injection to deal with the situation as the numbers rise in the country. We know the health infrastructure of the country has come under a lot of stress. So to deal with that, the Prime Minister took a stock of the situation, and different states are imposing the sort of restrictions they feel are good enough to deal with the situation on hand. For example, as we said, Delhi imposed a lockdown, a 6-day lockdown. Rajasthan has imposed a 15-day lockdown like curbs in the state. Maharashtra is dealing with it its own way by imposing strict restrictions. So different states are doing what they can to contain the virus and take the stress off the country's health infrastructure. Well, to talk more about that, I'm joined by Dr. Sunil Kumar Raina. He's professor and head of community medicine at the Dr. R.P. Government Medical College in Tanda in Himachal Pradesh. Dr. Raina, many thanks for joining us. First of all, give us a sense of what you make of the efforts various states are taking to deal with the situation. Are these measures enough? Are these measures too little, too late? Or do you still feel that the sudden surge that we see in the second wave can be contained by the measures various states are taking today?
I would like to respond it is this way. In public health, we say nothing is too little, too late. Anything that is initiated at any point in time, which is initiated with a view to mitigate the impact of disasters or mitigate the impact of pandemics or epidemics of this nature, is always good. So it's not late, to be very precise. But it would have been better if we had initiated it slightly earlier than we are initiating at this point in time. So that way, maybe we are slightly late, but at any point in time, given the fact that we have initiated an action, it's always a welcome step. Now, if you look at what's happening around us, or if you look at how exactly the world is dealing with this pandemic, there are no magic bullets for this. There is no one magic wand with which we can get rid of this pandemic. There are certain simple principles upon which most of the countries are fighting this pandemic. It's with regard to restrictions, with regard to building up capacity, with regard to building up social messaging, or with regard to vaccination. These are the 3 or 4 basic principles on which every country is fighting this pandemic. And most of our states, as a country as a whole, as well as most of our states are doing the same. They're using restrictions now, restrictions which may be varying from being pliable to very stringent, like the curfew that we are seeing in some parts of the country. They're also thinking of upgradation of capacities, whether it is with regard to testing, treating, isolation, or treatment, and then also with regard to social messaging. But as far as I am concerned, how I see it is this way. Which are the countries across the world which are winning in its battle against this pandemic? And I am fascinated by one story, which comes from Taiwan, the story that comes from Taiwan with regard to their battle with the pandemic. Taiwan is a country which is not very high on GDP. It's not a country which is rich, but has been doing wonderfully well with regard to this pandemic. And the primary success that Taiwan had when they mitigated the impact of first wave, or they are able to mitigate the impact of second wave now, has been they have been very fast. They have enforced all of these mitigation strategies very rapidly, and that's why they have been successful. So probably if we act now, act rapidly, and are very decisive with our steps, we will be able to win this battle.
So what are those decisive steps? I mean, this second wave, the kind of numbers that we are seeing, more than 260,000 new cases coming in every day. Some projections say they would go well over 3 lakh per day, more than 1,500 deaths. in a day because of this pandemic, because of the second wave. So how do we break this transmission now? Does it require a situation like Delhi where you had to impose a curfew for 6 days, hoping that the transmission will break? Bangladesh did that so, but they've extended it by another week. So what is the way to break this transmission?
This is very important, Amrit. This is an important question, and we need to address it in a simple way. I call it the 5-week challenge. Every state should have this 5-week challenge with themselves. So probably picking up a 5-week period from now, every state should decide on the steps to be taken in these 5 weeks to get rid of the pandemic. Now, the first step will be to galvanize all available resources, all available capacities at your hand to address this 5-week challenge, wherein you want to reduce the number of cases to the minimum. So how do we do that? The key in this infection, in this pandemic, is transmission. So the key will be to reduce transmission, what we generally call as the zero COVID strategy. The idea should be that over an extended period of 5 weeks, there should be no new cases in this area. Or if there are any cases in this area, in a particular geographic area, all of these cases are identified. All of their contacts are identified and quarantined. So we need to think in those terms. So restricting transmission and thinking of a zero COVID strategy will be one part of it. The second step will be all these areas which are seeing higher transmission need to localize their lockdown. We may not see a national level lockdown, but we need to see a localized lockdown which is able to curtail the outgoing or people coming out of these areas which are seeing high number of cases of COVID-19 at this point in time. At the same point in time, we also need to identify within this country or within districts or within states areas which are relatively seeing lesser number of cases. Now, these areas can be isolated from the one which are seeing higher number of cases. And some amount of flexibility with regard to movement, with regard to workplace, with regard to other activities, economic activities, can be allowed in these green areas or areas which are seeing lesser number of cases. Schools, colleges, and universities, I would say, should not be opened at this point in time. These should be closed for a slight period of time now. Now, workplaces, all workplaces which are mandatory to open. Now, those workplaces, for example, private setups or private workplaces, wherein people can work from home, they should be allowed to work from home and contribute to the system from there only. Now, those places which are mandatory to open, those states which are mandatory, those workplaces which are mandatory to open, need to build in themselves a system which is resilient to change in a way that they are able to build a workforce which is resilient to the pandemic influences. In what sense I would say is that instead of having a 10 to 6 time period for office goers in workplaces, we need to resort to a 7 to 7 work timing in these workplaces. So maybe stagger the people who are attending the workplace, stagger the employees who are attending the workplace. So this is something that will need to be done. Developing a strategy which is robust to social conflict and is robust to individual compliances will be the key. So maybe we need to involve communities, we need to involve individuals to contribute to this pandemic mitigation plan. Now, compliance from individuals may not be 100%. This is something that is very important to be understood. Compliance from individuals may not be 100%, but once we have a strategy which is robust to human compliance, robust to individual compliance, we may be able to succeed.
Okay. But Professor Raina, let's be realistic. As you rightly say that 100% compliance, probably expecting that would be unrealistic because fatigue sets in. Let's look at what happened. You know, when the lockdown was, when the unlocking happened, people thought it's gone away. The numbers suggested that, well, it's pretty low. People started going out to the markets. Fatigue did set in. People became casual with their masks. You know, they started wearing it over their chins. They became casual, including, you know, many people we work with, including why point fingers at others. I myself was very casual. Thankfully, I was fortunate not to have contracted COVID, but I don't know if I've contracted and gotten well. My question now is that I come to office, I may be asymptomatic, I don't know if I've contracted it, I may communicate it to the others. Now, you can only have that much amount of testing. That is what your testing infrastructure permits. But when we are overwhelmed by numbers that exist today, the level of infections that prevail, how do we break this? How do we see that everybody is tested? How do we work towards that?
Yeah, this is the problem. That's why I said that one country that has fascinated me is Vietnam. It's a country with a sizable population, and others, say for example Australia or New Zealand, with a small population, they have been able to win this battle. And India has challenges. India has not just challenges because of the numbers. It has huge numbers, but it also has challenges because of the diversity, whether it is this geographical diversity or whether it is demographic diversity. India has its own challenges. But you need to remember that we did win it. The first phase we did win. We did arrive at numbers which was pretty low in the month of February. And the best way to be successful in all aspects of life is to repeat your success stories. So whatever we did in the first phase should be repeated again. So if we had the lockdown and we did enforce it stringently, it was successful. It did help us. We also had a very good messaging system. If you look at the social campaign that we launched in the first phase, it was very successful and very well responded to by the people. Every time you had a phone ringing in, you could hear the voice coming to you about the social campaign. So what has happened probably is that we have a sort of response fatigue has set in, and also a feeling of what you refer to as the prevention paradox, wherein people who don't wear the mask or people who wear the mask but have never ever suffered from the disease, they feel that whether you wear or you don't wear, it doesn't make a difference. So these two things probably do contribute. So how do we address that? The basic way to address, the best way to address both of these, response fatigue as well as the prevention paradox, is building good social messaging campaigns. And these messaging campaigns should be bottom up instead of top down. So we may involve individuals, we may involve communities, we may need to involve ward people, and every city should have it at its own level. And the social messaging campaigning should be built in such a way that we reach out to most of the people. But more importantly, our social messaging campaign should be built in such a way that it is able to reach the youngsters, who should be our target group now, because they will carry the infection home. Or those who work in the offices, they should be the ones who are targeted more frequently than home. Specifically, as you asked with regard to your offices, I would request every office in charge or every office head who deals with the offices to report on a daily basis as to how many employees do follow COVID appropriate behavior. This should be a daily reporting that is being done in the offices. So how many of them follow the COVID appropriate behavior? How many of them wear the mask? So if you are putting in place some mechanism, which is a check mechanism of a sort, you may be able to enforce these restrictions, enforce COVID appropriate behavior more stringently, and you will see the results much better than we are seeing at this point in time.
All right. Professor Rana, I request you to stay on the show. Let's widen this discussion. I'll have my colleagues joining me from Dhaka and New Delhi. But let's bring you this news first. United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson has cancelled his visit to India, which was due on the 25th and 26th of this month. He cancelled it today in view of the prevailing COVID situation. That's what the statement issued by the External Affairs Ministry says. In view of the prevailing COVID situation, it has been decided by mutual agreement that Prime Minister of the United Kingdom will not visit India next week. The two sides will be holding a virtual meeting in the coming days to launch plans for a transformed India-UK relationship. Both leaders attach the highest importance to taking the India-UK partnership to its fullest potential and propose to remain in close touch in this regard and look forward to an in-person meeting later this year. So that's the news. My colleague Abhishek Jha joins me on the phone line. Abhishek, you know, this seems like a jinxed visit where Boris Johnson has tried to come to India twice, but for reasons, different reasons, he's been able, he was forced to cancel his visit to India. Now the MEA says, a virtual meeting will be held. Would this be held at the level of the two premiers, and any idea when the virtual summit could be slated for?
Talking about jinx, Amrit, there have been so many foreign engagements at highest level internationally that have been jinxed in the recent times, that this is just one of that case. how this is the second time that UK Prime Minister had to cancel his visit to India for some reasons. The other side of the story would be that both the Prime Minister will be talking virtually this time, so that there would not be any communication gap, and the virtual summit we can expect somewhere in the last week of this month, because the spokesperson of 10 Downing Street, they have said that in light of this current COVID situation, the travel has been stopped of the UK Prime Minister, but the dialogue will still continue virtually, where both Prime Minister will be talking about the various bilateral issues of importance, issues of regional security, cooperation, defense, and all that that could have happened when they would have met physically. The only thing is that this time, apparently it was supposed that UK Prime Minister will be traveling to some other cities also. In Pune and in Bombay, it was said that he may have some travel plan where he'll be engaging with some corporates and other officials. But that seems not happening right now, because this virtual summit will be between the two Prime Ministers, and the talks would be mostly limited to what the two Prime Ministers see as the current issues of importance and how do they want the bilateral ties to go ahead in the days to come.
Abhishek, do your sources in the MEA tell you that when this virtual summit could take place? Would it be on the same dates as the UK Prime Minister was planning to travel to India?
So officially, it has not been, any date has not been marked, but we are learning that sometimes in the last week of this month, like it could be like the 26th was the expected date of his arrival in India. But now, if that is not happening, we can assume that both the Prime Minister will be having some, scheduled weekend in their plan, and during those time only, both the leader could engage on some talk, factoring in the time difference between the two countries. This will be decided what time suits and what times would be the most appropriate time, and both the leader can happen to talk virtually with each other.
All right, Abhishek, many thanks for giving us that update. And I'm now joined by my colleague Rajesh Jha, who joins me from Dhaka. Rajesh, first to you, what is the situation presently in Bangladesh, especially in view of the lockdown that has been further extended there?
Amrit, the situation here is quite grim. If you look at the figures, last 4 days, every day is a new record. It started with 101 deaths. Again, next day it was 101 deaths, 102 deaths, and today it's recorded 112 deaths. This is the largest number since March 2020, when the corona pandemic was first detected in Bangladesh. Now, in terms of the government preparation and the government response to it, you see, they have declared from 5th of March, they declared the first round of lockdown, because the situation started worsening in the second week of March. If you look at it, you can say that the second wave in Bangladesh started from the second week of March, and government took a decision to impose a lockdown from the 5th of April. Now, in the first week of the lockdown that they announced on 5th of April, initially they said that the public transport would be shut down and there would be no buses, trains, flights or waterways operating during that period. But just in a day or two, they decided that no, the public transport would operate inside, the buses would operate inside the city. And then they also decided that the factories would open and so on and so forth. So this way, the first week of the lockdown was kind of tentative and it was hardly effective. But keeping in mind the rising number of cases, you see the positivity rate in Bangladesh had fallen to below 3% by the end of February. And by the first week of April, it had gone up to say around 22-23%. So alarmed by the increase in the positivity rate of the samples collected for testing in Bangladesh, government announced that the second week of lockdown would be a hard lockdown, meaning thereby that the government would take every step to enforce the lockdown in the country, and the police would be deployed and the security forces would make it sure that there would not be any violation of the lockdown situation. Now, in the second lockdown also, the government allowed the factories to open. you know, Bangladesh has a very strong ready-made garment sector.
True.
It contributes almost 80% of the export, 80% of the revenue, the export revenue of the government. So the government has been trying hard to balance these two things, trying to protect the life of the people and also to let the liver of the economy going and to protect their livelihood. In
Okay.
view of that, they decided that the industries would open, but offices, private and government offices, all these have been closed. And the first week of the lockdown is coming to an end on 14th. Today, there was an announcement by the government that the next round of lockdown will start from 15th. It will last sorry, it will start from 22nd and last for a week. And this would be more strict. So this time the government is trying hard to kind of control the spread of coronavirus in the country and to make sure that it doesn't go out of hand. So this way you can see the situation is probably very, very difficult over here. Although I can tell you that over the last 3 days, the positivity rate in the country has declined from over 20% to around 17% today, which is a very remarkable decline. And the number of people who are testing positive is also declining, say from 7,000 around a week back to around 4,000 today. So these are a few of the positive signs, but deaths continue to be very high. Younger people are dying in larger numbers. Government is getting overwhelmed by the number of people coming for treatment in the hospital. The usual problems that you hear in India, in Bangladesh also you hear about the problem of oxygen and so on. So
All
this
right.
is the situation here, Amrit.
All right, Rajesh Jha, I request you to stay on. Dr. Professor Raina, let me, I'm sure you must have heard my colleague Rajesh Jha speak from Dhaka. Now, it's a similar situation in India. For example, if we compare what Dhaka did, this is what Delhi is trying to do. Arvind Kejriwal, the Chief Minister of Delhi, today announced a 6-day lockdown, saying that we are left with virtually no ICU beds. The situation is really bad. It could worsen. He said, he used words like people could start dying on the roads. We want to avoid that sort of a situation. So we are forced to impose a lockdown. He requested the migrants with folded hands that please don't migrate out of Delhi. Hold on for 6 days. Hopefully after 6 days, things will be better. We wouldn't need to extend this lockdown. The positivity rate, if Rajesh Jha tells us, is around 17%, is down from 20 to 17. In Delhi alone, the positivity rate is 30%. Now, in a situation like this, here you are imposing a lockdown. One, there is this paradox. How do you deal with the economic stress that a lockdown puts? How does a government decide on that? How do the people bear that and survive through that? The second is, how do you deal with the overwhelming numbers that are coming in? So it's a difficult decision to take, but again, you've allowed 50 people together for weddings, 20 for funerals. People can, some offices can open. The public transport will run, albeit with 50%. So it's not sort of the hard lockdown. Do you think, given what Rajesh Jha is saying of the Bangladesh experiment, the Delhi experiment would yield results?
Amrit, this is a very difficult situation. You need to understand it in this way. We and Bangladesh are more or less similar in a lot of parameters. And every country like India or Bangladesh has its own share of vulnerables. So if we see it this way, at any point in time, 30% of us are vulnerable to pandemics or catastrophes or disasters of such magnitude. Governments across the world, particularly in our part of the world, are thinking of these vulnerables also when they talk of lockdown. So they are worried about these vulnerables. Therefore, they make a compromise on lockdown. So they say maybe a 6-day lockdown will be able to tide over the situation, and we are not compromising on the livelihood of the vulnerables. I see it slightly differently. Now, most of us in the scientific world are thinking of lockdowns of freezing time. So we see during this period of lockdown, I will freeze time and get time or buy time to prepare better for the post-lockdown period. In a sense, that my numbers will fall and my system will be better prepared for the post-lockdown period. I don't see it that way. I see it differently. I see lockdown as an opportunity to reach out to maximum number of cases that are potentially in my area. That's why maybe 7 days period of lockdown is small. 7 days period of lockdown is small for this. Ideally, I would need a period of 5 weeks to reach out to every case in my place and search them and test them, treat them, isolate them. If I am looking at a smaller period of lockdown, I will have situations wherein I have a lockdown, I open up, cases rise, I place a lockdown again, and I again open up. So maybe sort of a yo-yo lockdowns will be there, which are going to hurt the economy more than maybe a stricter, longer lockdown, wherein my aim is to not just build the public health system, which may not be ideally built in 5 weeks, but maybe build the capacity of the public health system to respond to pandemic, but also to identify and test and treat and quarantine as many as I can. So that's the way we should see lockdowns, not as an end strategy, but a beginning strategy when we are anticipating a large number of cases.
Professor, you head the community medicine department there. Have you guys in the medical science figured out some sort of a timeline that to break a transmission cycle, 1 week or 2 weeks? Is there some sort of a timeline which can, break the transmission cycle? Is there a template?
That's why, sorry.
I said, is there a template?
We generally see it this way. Look, 14 days is the time of the incubation period. Maximum 14 days is the time of incubation period for this for the COVID-19 virus. So we say double the time. So that means around 28 days is double the incubation period. So that's why I said maybe a period of 5 weeks, wherein we have enough of time to break the transmission, identify all the cases. So that's why the stress is on this 5-week period. Otherwise, I would have said maybe a 7-day period, maybe a 14-day period. The template that is being used world over now is the 5-week period, and 5-week period is supposed to yield us more results than maybe a 7-day period or a 14-day period.
Oh, okay. Rajesh Jha, I'll let you have the last question. You're saying that the government has given an indication that the next lockdown is going to be even harder. What are the indications? Are they looking at stopping public transport at all completely? Would it be a complete shutdown?
Amrit, public transport is already shut down.
Okay.
The international flights have been further suspended for 1 more week till April 28. The buses are not operating, but the thing is that the people have become a little bit of lax. In the first 3 days, I could see that there was a lot more compliance by the people of the lockdown. But from 4th day onwards, slightly people started coming out of their homes. In the lanes and by lanes of Dhaka, you could see people moving out and going to malls, going out for buying essentials and so on and so forth. So I think in the second round of the stricter lockdown that the government is planning or has announced, it will be strongly enforcing it. The problem with countries like Bangladesh, I think to an extent is with India also is the governance capacity. In cities and some major towns, they are able to enforce the lockdown, but that may not be possible to do it in all the places. So public awareness and the willing compliance with government's instruction is the key, which government will have to do a lot to inspire people to adopt. That is the situation here, Amrit.
All right. Rajesh Jha, Professor Sunil Kumar Raina, thank you so much for joining me on the show and lending us your insights. And moving on, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said that the pandemic is a moment to reflect on how do we build deeper strengths, capacities which would allow us to face this kind of storms in future. He was speaking at IMA India National Leadership Conclave virtually.
This is a moment really to reflect on how do we build deeper strengths, capacities which would allow us to face this kind of storms in the future. For me, the great takeaway in the making is that this is a lesson to us that you cannot, you can't take risks in good times and think that the risks will not come back to haunt you in tough times. All the pressures on us today to ramp up production, etc., I hope as a country, as an economy, as an industry, all of us take that as a sort of message that we need to build very much stronger and very much deeper at home.
Well, let's talk about the United States. And the incidents of shooting in the United States are up again. Austin police on Sunday confirmed that the suspect in the shooting deaths of the 3 persons is a former police detective, and also confirmed it being a domestic situation, even as they reduced the massive police presence in the area. In the meantime, in another state of the United States, 3 persons were killed and 2 injured in a shooting at a bar in Kenosha County of Wisconsin early on Sunday.
It was a violent weekend in the United States. US was once again rocked by back-to-back shootings. 3 multiple shootings were reported in the United States in just 24 hours. 5 people were hospitalized after being shot and injured in Shreveport, Louisiana. 1 victim was shot in the head, while another suffered multiple gunshot wounds. That's not all. Earlier on Sunday, 3 people had died at an apartment complex in Austin, Texas, and authorities were hunting for a former deputy sheriff wanted in connection with the fatal shooting. Separately, 3 people were killed and 2 wounded in a shooting at a bar in Kenosha County, Wisconsin in the early hours on the same day. United States is already on the edge over a surge in shootings in recent weeks. The spate of shootings has increased public pressure to tighten the gun regulations. Most Americans support tougher gun laws reportedly. United States has been rocked by deadly shootings of late. President Joe Biden and his Attorney General Merrick Garland announced limited measures to tackle gun violence in the United States on April the 8th in what the White House described as a first step to curb mass shootings, community bloodshed and suicides. The new measures include plans for the Justice Department to crack down on self-assembled ghost guns and make stabilizing braces which effectively turn pistols into rifles, subject to registration under the National Firearms Act. Biden said he will also ask the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives to release an annual report on firearms trafficking in the United States and make it easier for the states to adopt red flag laws that flag at-risk individuals who own guns. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, DD India.
And in Egypt, almost 100 persons were injured on Sunday when 4 train carriages derailed in Kailubia province of North Cairo. The train was heading from Cairo to the Nile Delta city of Mansoura and derailed at around afternoon time about 40 kilometers north of Cairo. The Egyptian National Railways in a short statement said that the cause of the accident is being investigated. Also, the country's health ministry has said more than 50 ambulances took the injured to 3 hospitals in the province. The derailing is the latest of several recent railway crashes in Egypt. At least 20 persons were killed and nearly 200 were injured in March when 2 trains collided near Tahata, which is about 440 kilometers south of Cairo. Protesters gathered outside the Russian embassy in Prague on Sunday after the Czech Republic expelled 18 Russian embassy officials. The expulsion came after accusation of Moscow's involvement in the ammunition depot blast at the Czech town in 2014. Protesters waving European Union and NATO flags chanted anti-Russian slogans and signed a petition calling on the EU to support the Czech Republic. 7 persons were briefly detained after they splashed the walls of the embassy building with ketchup in the early morning hours on Sunday. The Czech Republic on Saturday, as I said, had expelled 18 embassy staff accusing Russian spy services in the ammunition depot blast some 300 kilometers east of capital Prague. The explosions and allegations have triggered the biggest dispute between the Czechs and the Russians since the 1989 end of the communist rule, when Prague was under Moscow's domination for decades. British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab expressed Britain's full support to the Czech Republic after the fallout with Russian embassy. The United Kingdom stands in full support of the Czech allies who have exposed the lengths that the GRU will go to in their attempts to conduct dangerous and malign operations, and highlights a disturbing pattern of behavior following the attack in Salisbury. This is what Raab said on Twitter. Two men carrying Russian passports by the names of Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov were accused of an ammunition depot explosion in the Czech town of Vorbetice in 2014. These were aliases used by two Russian military intelligence GRU officers who the British prosecutors charged with the attempted poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia with a nerve agent Novichok in the English city of Salisbury in 2018. Moscow denied involvement in that incident. And the daughter of hunger-striking Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has called on Russian authorities to allow a doctor to treat her father in prison a day after a group of medical professionals warned that he's at the risk of kidney failure. Navalny's daughter, Dasha, a student at Stanford University, wrote on Twitter asking authorities to allow a doctor to see her father. Meanwhile, in a television interview with BBC, Russia's ambassador to Britain, Andrei Kelin, accused Navalny of attention-seeking. He further said that Navalny will not be allowed to die in prison. Navalny, who's a fierce opponent of Russian President Vladimir Putin, started refusing food on the 31st of March in protest at what he said was a refusal of prison authorities to provide him with proper medical care for acute back and leg pain. However, prison authorities say they've offered Navalny proper medical care, but that the 44-year-old opposition politician has refused it and insisted on being treated by a doctor of his choice from outside the facility. Well, talking about NASA now, there were cheers and there were applause. There was applause as NASA scripted history. American Space Agency NASA's miniature robot helicopter Ingenuity today performed a successful takeoff and landing on Mars, achieving the first powered controlled flight by an aircraft over the surface of another planet. The U.S. Space Agency said in a statement that the development, which many are calling NASA's Wright brothers moment, can pave the way for new modes of exploration on Mars and other destinations in the solar system. According to NASA, 1.8 kilogram solar-powered helicopter had performed its maiden 40-second flight precisely as planned 3 hours earlier. And let's now take a look at what else made news around the globe.
After wildfire on the slopes of South Africa's Table Mountain engulfed buildings in University of Cape Town, the authorities are now probing if the fire was started deliberately. The wildfire, which started on Sunday, set ablaze buildings including the nearly 200-year-old library and forced students to evacuate. 2 firefighters sustained injuries and were hospitalized for treatment. However, no injuries to civilians were reported. Heavy smoke could be seen for kilometers away. Some roads were closed and fire alerts were sent to mountain hikers. Another volcanic eruption on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, where authorities said an explosive eruption took place in the late afternoon on Sunday amid reports that ash clouds were towards the south and west of the island. The nations that make up the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America Peoples Trade Agreement provided aid to the island. The coordinator of the United Nations Organization for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean warned that the eruption of La Soufriere opens the possibility of a humanitarian crisis in this Caribbean territory and nearby islands. About 20,000 people have been evacuated from their homes since volcano began to erupt last week. In Philippines, heavy rain and huge waves battered Catabalogan, an eastern city, on Sunday as super typhoon Surige brushed past the country's eastern shores. Huge waves battered a seawall in the city as people huddled under shelter, surrounded by floodwater for the storm to pass in a local market. Super typhoon Surige, locally known as Bising, is expected to bring winds of up to 120 kilometers per hour to parts of eastern Philippines, but the center of the storm is expected to remain at sea. Philippines Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Services Administration in a statement said that winds of up to 215 kilometers per hour were forecast at the center of the storm, but typhoon is not expected to make landfall. Syria will hold its presidential election on May 26th. The country's parliament announced on Sunday a vote which is expected to return President Bashar al-Assad for a third term in office. Assad's family and his Ba'ath party have ruled Syria for more than 5 decades, holding a strong grip on power with the help of the powerful security forces and army. A bloody crackdown on pro-democracy protesters by Assad's security apparatus in 2011 led to a devastating civil war. 2 men died after the Tesla vehicle, which was believed to be operating without anyone in the driver's seat, crashed into a tree in the United States, Houston. The 2019 Tesla Model S was traveling at a high rate of speed when it failed to negotiate a curve and went off the roadway, crashing to a tree and bursting into flames. The authorities said in a statement. After the fire was extinguished, authorities located 2 occupants in the vehicle, with one in the front passenger seat while the other was in the back seat of the Tesla. Colombian search and rescue personnel have retrieved 5 bodies from an illegal gold mine that flooded nearly a month ago. With little hopes of survival, authorities are now working to retrieve the bodies of the 11 miners that were trapped underground 22 days ago when a shaft flooded in the rural area of Nira, Caldas. Rescuers kept up search efforts in the hope the remaining 6 bodies could receive a proper burial by loved ones. World Today Desk, DD India.
And that's it then in World Today. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time. But remember, the situation can only improve if we play our part. And the biggest weapon we have is following COVID appropriate behavior. Try going out as less as possible. Try keeping a distance, maintain a distance, a 6 feet distance, or a 2 gaz ki duri. And this, the mask, is your weapon against fighting and defeating the pandemic. Wear that always when you go out, and wear it properly, that covers your nose and your mouth. Till then, till we meet again, stay safe. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.